Hey guys, Thomas Jr. here, aka Mustached. I'm here to review the movie Damsel. If you end up enjoying this full movie review, then please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Also make sure to check out those links in the description. One will head you over to my petition to help out smaller YouTubers. Second and third to my Patreon and PayPal, where you can help support me and my channel directly. And fourth to my Discord server, where you can join, collab, shield, do all that cool stuff for free, and showing will be reminded at the end of the review. With all that out of the way, let's get into Damsel. So upon seeing the trailer for this movie, I will be upfront about this, I do think that they revealed way too much information about this movie. Even its poster, in comparison to its title, suggests that some sort of obvious transformation is going to occur, and I don't think that's a good marketing strategy. On top of, again, the overall trailer of said movie, once again, reveals way too much. I think the great cutoff period of said trailer should have cut just as she meets just as she either falls down or just as we hear the dragon, and then cut, and that's the end of the trailer. I think by showing her the beginning of her transformation and even latter parts of her transformation in the trailer is really poor and really reveals way too much of this movie's story/plot before the movie even begins. I mean, it's one of those things where you look at the trailer and go, well, what's the point of watching the movie? It feels like I watched the entire movie through the trailer. Again, this is something that has been guilted by various trailers in the past, and it's really bizarre that it still keeps happening, and people wonder why movies like this will probably be failures. Well, it's probably because you're telling them way too much information instead of just hinting at what could be and just giving them just enough information to be like, I'm intrigued, instead of revealing again the crux of this entire movie's sort of plot. Speaking of, let's get into, well, the obvious now considered plot of said story, go over it and look at it as objectively as possible. So the movie does begin with some narration from our lead, named Elodie, I believe her name is. And she has a younger sister named Fiona, and they have two parents, a mom and a dad. So that's our family dynamic that we are dealing with. We're also in this old-timey kingdom, but through our narration, we're learning that this story is not about something. This is not about something chivalrous, aka, the typical, as the title card above seems to imply. This is not a typical fairy tale, as it seems to imply. Nor is it necessarily about chivalry. Now, of course, when talking about chivalry, you get the knight in shining armor, fighting the dragon, the very old cliche of that is what that is alluding to. So we do begin the movie from the perspective of these men and this king riding up in this cave system, chasing after a dragon. At least that is the perspective of which we are seeing currently, which does play a part later in the movie. So we'll keep that in the back of your mind as I'm going through the said review. But we see that the dragon fights back, cutting off the entire front line of the men, and then swiftly dealing with the remains until he is the last remaining man there. And it cuts from there to our main lead, Elodie, as I mentioned earlier, and her younger sister, kind of making their way. And they make their way to their parents, and their father is excited as they receive a cordial invitation, as it were, to into this sort of wedding proposal that is being arranged. Which, by the way, fun fact, this is, speaking of weddings, it's historical precedents, because I know some people like to think that weddings have always been about this whole religious thing. Well, this movie is actually accurate in this, in that there are other ways there are other reasons people get married, and this is one of them that we see. That being that there are two different, sort of sections. This family that we're following at the beginning, and we're seeing that they're wedding into this family that has a bunch of other wealth, but they need the other royalty, at least that's what they keep saying, to bring prosperous fortitude to said city. This is something that has happened in real life, that being weddings that take hold to unify two different areas instead of going to war. That is a thing that happened historically. I find that so fascinating whenever I talk about history, especially when in comparison to people who just think weddings are just about religion. It's like, yeah, bring up the historical context that proves that wrong, by the way. So yeah, they accept, the entire family does, even though we see clearly that Elodie is pretty nervous about the whole thing. She's the one being proposed to, after all, in this scenario. So they set sail. We travel with them via boat to this area. They see these dragon statues, in which they thought that, they see the initial one, they think it's like a real dragon for like a second, and then they see it's not moving. They're like, oh, it's just a statue. Okay. It's a cool design thing going on here. So as they're setting up, they get they arrive, they meet the prince named Henry, pretty typical prince name, I guess, and day shifts to night. And we see, a little montage between this section where Henry and her are kind of having their conversation about, like, oh, what kind of person do you think I am based on the letters, and so on and so forth, and stuff like that. So they don't spend a great deal of time on this, and I think it's done very deliberately too, because this whole wedding thing seems to be like, no. And the father seems okay with this. This seems to be, again, very much in line with everything that seems to be setting up this whole scenario. So we know, based on that, that the father made some sort of deal about her daughter, and money was clearly involved. By the way, another real thing about marriage, selling off your daughter, that used to also be a thing that would happen, just generally speaking, back in the day. Again, has nothing to do with religion, but it's a thing that used to happen, so, again, another notch against, like, yeah, this is just a religious thing between male and female. It's like, put that on pause, and again, remember historical actual evidence that suggests otherwise. So, anyway. So, as we are kind of rushing things along, the mother on their side, on Elodie's side, meets with the queen. She seems to get the name wrong, Elodie, and this creates a level of suspicion by the... Oh, by the way, it's a stepmom in this situation. I should probably clarify that for, down the line when they do end up calling her, or at least Elodie calls her mom at the end of the movie. I guess spoilers. But, she kind of goes back to Elodie, trying to warn her that, saying, you don't have to do this, and Elodie seems, again, still a little bit on the wavering side, and the father seems to very much be in favor of said wedding. So we have a very, triangle-like sort of dynamic going into how everyone's sort of looking at said marriage. But everything, as I mentioned, is rushed. We kind of spring into said wedding the next day immediately. We see her getting dressed up. We then cut right to the wedding. The next day, they kiss, blah blah blah, and we're jumping right into the after correlation sort of deal. And they're brought to the mountain, the one you see in the trailer, where we see that event take place. And everyone has these masks on, and a little bit of okay, I wasn't expecting all that, kind of face vibes going on there. And the queen kind of goes on about this story about how this old tradition about how 3 princesses were sacrificed to satisfy this dragon, and this doesn't create any sense of suspicion from Elodie. She's kind of just going, I guess yellow flag at most, about why she's even explaining any of this. But the prince suggests that he carry her back over to, bridal style, back. I guess it was going to be implied, at least initially, that he was going to do that all the way back. But, of course, as we see in the trailer, he tosses her down this cavern that they're above, because it's like a small, thin bridge. And beneath it, again, is that cavern. So she gets tossed down there. We see that she, bumps and bruises and all sorts of ways of going down. And of course she's bleeding a little bit. And once she cries out for help a few times, that is when the dragon itself awakens. So she begins to notice, as she's looking around, as these identical objects, like the crown, for example, or I think that's the first thing she comes across, or one of them, and she realizes pretty quickly here that she is now considered one of these 3 sacrifices, as it were. She grabs a sharp branch and begins to head deeper into the cave. Once in an opening, she sees a burnt bird kind of struggling, and she's trying to calm it and mercy it, I guess, to the best of her ability. Though we do then see multiple birds cast into the fire, and it's quite a of awakening, or a view sight. An awakening is a really bad word for that, but whatever. She begins to hear the dragon roar, and we see again all these birds are dying out. So she's attempting to hide from the dragon, obviously, and I've seen the trailer for this a few times. I don't recall the dragon speaking in the trailers itself. Maybe I didn't catch it, but it does speak. And it's asking her name. So she eventually replies. And then after this display, it's like we can see that the dragon has a sense of what type of dragon we're dealing with, as the dragon allows her to run by, well, saying run. This is my favorite part, implying that this dragon enjoys the hunt, as it were. But she sees a dead body and continues to try and flee her and hide on her own. And as she's like making her way up this smaller path, she removes the bottom portion of her corset. I believe that's what that part's called. Like the I don't know what like the actual like tool that it is. Like back in the old days when you used to get married, when the tool that helps create the illusion that the dress is going out thicker like this. Like it's a part of what helps build the corset, but I actually don't know what the actual device is called, unfortunately. So I do apologize for my lack of knowledge in that regard specifically, but regardless, she removes that part and that allows her to squirm her way up this smaller portion of the cave as well. Other parts of her gown are torn off, so that transformation that we already are spoiled to is beginning here. So she begins to cover her wounds from the slight burns that she got making her way up there, because the dragon cast fire upon her, or tried to anyway. So she uses this golden cup thingamabob that she was offered by them to essentially engulf some of the fire and use it as a light source. A part of her gown, she was given this light dagger, or golden dagger sort of thing in a sheath. And I think there was like one other thing she was given by them specifically, but I don't recall. It might be in my notes later, but I don't know if she uses it or not. But I digress. So as she's traveling, more of her clothes is torn here as well. Again, while trying to crawl through a small space, and her fire burns out the actual fire, which I guess is a sort of also representation of like, oh, she's gonna soon give up hope, but then find something new. So she reaches a chasm with this blue light on this gap that she sees. On the other side. So she drops her ring, the one that was given to her. That's the third object, or one of the objects she was obviously given as a part of the wedding. And makes the jump successfully using that dagger that was given to her to help her clear the jump itself. So she begins to see that this light source, that some of it is being caused by these blue-looking slugs. So she tears off more for the other side of her gown that's still like available, starts to scoop up these glowing blue worms, and now she has a new form of light source. A new hope, as it were. She then, shortly after, finds this water source. She's happy, able to drink something, but the water is filled with like seaweed and all this guck. And sadly, this little brevity is cut off as the dragon once again finds her. Very briefly, though. So she comes across more dresses, and she finds this area where several names have been carved out, in which she adds her own name to this list of names of obvious previous females that have been put in this exact same circumstance. So she rests up while shivering a little bit here because she has a little bit of a reprieve from the dragon once more. And she begins to imagine what these other females have gone through in this scenario, imagining them physically being there in a sense. And one of them voices out to her that this whole thing is based on a lie, but she doesn't know what that means, so there's a bit of, though this isn't a fairy tale, that element of it does seem very, well, fairy tale, if we're being completely honest. So she sees or discovers that the blue slugs have an additional property, a rather useful one, might I add, is that they seem to leech off the blood that she's acquired, as well as the burn marks as well, so they seem to have some sort of healing capabilities. And surprise, surprise, more of her gown comes off, and then she begins to read the map, and from it she decides that the best path forward is taking this sort of middle path between these three branching paths that she sees on this chalk map that she's reading from the other ladies that have been previously down here, and enters this musical chamber. She removes more of her gown, so now there's like virtually nothing left of it, so what's left is what she kind of came in with, so this sort of more brownish sort of clothing that she was wearing before. And she's using the gown pieces as like footstools, because in front of her it's like a crystal like wall essentially that like, and lifted above it is a large crystal path that leads to an opening, and this is assumably a path that she, based off of the map she read, she assumes that this is an escape, like she assumes that someone has escaped previously from her. So she climbs up. The dragon, we see the dragon wait below, and it even is taunting her, so kind of a little bit here, like saying like, fly, little bird, or whatever the dragon says, something along those lines. So the dragon's kind of waiting to see what will happen here. Again, more so it's seemingly like a path, or not a path, but like a challenge almost. And we do almost see her fall, and when she does, the dragon opens its mouth to digest her. But she grabs onto another crystal before falling all the way in, obviously. And just as she's like making her way back up, both the dragon and her both hear a new voice coming down, or sorry, she gets out of in this pathway first, and she's looking out, and she notices now she's like super high up, to the point of if she were to drop, she would die essentially. And the person she assumed escaped, she turns around and sees the final skeleton of the one that made it this far. So the assumption is that either the dragon did something or she just waited it out there in this spot. Either way. So the dragon like scoops around to the other outside and then like tries to burn her up. But then as they kind of make their way back in, she hears a voice, a new voice. She saw people in the distance sort of making their way towards the cave. And it seems as if we see now, we've kind of cut away from her for just a moment here as we now follow these individuals that are moving in. We find out that one among them is her father, and he has hired on these people to essentially now save his daughter. Very clear implications going on here, though it becomes very knowledgeable as to what exactly happened. This is where we discover, however, where we cut back to the initial flashback, and we see that 3 dragon eggs are formed because she makes her way to this area where she sees these 3 dead little baby dragons, and then we cut back to them just being born, and we see that the king had ordered his men to kill the 3 baby dragons, and then we see the perspective of them turning to line up in that formation we saw earlier in the movie. So this was the thing that was kept away from us, the audience, very purposely so. So the dragon now has a reason to kill the people that are heading down this way. So the dragon has been killing individuals that have come down there of royal blood because they were the ones, the royal king was the one that slew the baby dragons. So, however, what the dragon doesn't know is that, and I guess I'll spoil this now, is that the whole wedding that we have seen, the cutting of the wrist here and connecting the 2 hands is what translates the royal blood into the sort of non-royal blood, I guess is how they kind of go about explaining this. So every female that has been down there technically wasn't of royal blood, but they were wedded into it. They were wedded into the royal blood, so they had a scent to them, as the dragon kind of explains. So the dragon goes to deal with, we cut back to the modern situation where the dragon hears these new voices and deals with these men. We see them getting taken out one by one once again. The father is saved for last. And it recognizes that there is a relationship to Elodie, so the dragon's like using him to get to her, and she's like off in the distant like upper path watching this sort of unfold now as she's made her way here. No, excuse me. So, obviously, with this, the father reveals that he, as what was implied earlier in the film, yes, literally sold off her daughter for gold, which is, again, a thing that used to happen in real life. Like, fathers would sell off their daughters for money. Like, that used to literally happen, which is crazy. It is crazy that that used to happen. And so, we now look at this and we see that he at least is feeling this immediate guilt upon doing it, is trying to, in his last moments here, because I mean the dragon's pretty much got him dead to rights at this point, is trying to you know again using him to get to her, but the father isn't allowing it. He calls off her, saying like, don't save me, or don't do what the dragon is clearly, because everything is echoing. Don't say what what the dragon is saying. And upon it, he's at this point killed, and she's like almost makes a noise or does so, and then the dragon like looks for her, but we actually do discover that there was actually one other guy on the completely opposite end of the cave at this point who makes a noise. So the dragon fucks off to deal with that, while she gets a moment with her father, and he's asking essentially for forgiveness for even, allowing his own, this idea that, sell my daughter for money, sort of, was the conclusion that he thought he needed to reach to, fulfill his grandeur of people. It is a dark sacrifice, and dark as well. And I do appreciate this scene, as it really allows you to sort of look back historically and think about, all of these different types of weddings, and how, these arranged marriages, or these weddings out of, profit, how these are, how historically these have been very dangerous to individual people, and especially in the latter half, and how, people would think about, like, well, I have to think about all these other people as a ruler, and the sort of balancing between being a person of the people in this case, or being a father, is essentially what is being asked here. Is, well, what do you do if you're in those times? Because obviously everything has changed from that. Obviously we don't do this anymore. We condemn these types of weddings, and hopefully we maintain that in current climate America, instead of, I don't know, wanting to go backwards for some crazy reason. Anyway, point being is that so she has her moment, and she then continues to use it to try to climb up the rope that they made their way, making it down. So she's climbing up it. The dragon uses one last gust of fire, but we see her barely escape, once again getting slightly burned, but still, making it out, essentially. Or almost doing so. Hold on. Oh, I think in my notes I went a little bit ahead here. Let me see. Yes. Yes. So yes, she does manage to escape successfully here. Sorry, my notes were a little bit on a different page, so I just had to make sure that was accurate. So she makes her way to this horse, from the 3 horses that were led here, so that all tracks. We see the dragon makes its way outside and begins to burn the horse as she like sends it forward and then she hides. So that is an interesting choice because it shows she was willing to make a type of sacrifice herself for her own life. So again, that it's a very interesting choice, I find, because we just talked about the whole father sacrificing thing, so I find that interesting that they did it twice over. I think that might have been, again, very purposeful here. But in this instance, it was out of self-preservation rather than on a larger scale of people. So it's just 2 different versions of, that sort of situation, I guess. As she's out there, she bumps back into her stepmom, and we saw that we kind of cut back a few times here, because the family see, like, the initial escape, or like the dragon's fire, like, spreading outward, and they're getting mad because they expected her not to have lasted this long. So now they're going to deal with it by grabbing the younger daughter, the younger sister in this case, to have her be the sacrifice. So they pull her away, so she's getting pulled away as our main character is escaping currently. So that is the landscape that we are following here, to be clear. So the younger daughter, is like brought to Henry, and even Henry at this point is like, she's too young, like, come on, like, seriously. So he's like fighting back against this, like, this is too much for even him. But the queen's like, nope, I'm gonna cut my own hand, I'm gonna blood of my blood on the younger daughter, tosses her down, so now she's in the cavern. As we see from the perspective of the main character, she meets with her stepmom. She talks about how the sister was taken. So Elodie makes her way all the way back to the marriage ceremony, so the top of the cavern. The bridge area, essentially, where she was tossed down. So we've done a full 180 of our scenario. But now she's in, almost full gear, as it were. Her transformation is pretty much complete, but not quite yet. But it's about to be. So she uses the rope bridge, the bridge's rope, excuse me, to make a path downwards significantly safer. And we see that we cut away back to the dragon, who's already holding the younger daughter hostage, which again I find a rather fascinating little choice here that they make. I mean, the dragon could have easily just killed her instead, but this dragon seems to be a lot more fixated on getting Elodie, and the dragon already knows that they're related. So we see her take up the armor that has been left behind by some of the guards. She grabs her father's sword and sheaves it, and now her getup of fighter mode is now complete. So we see her kind of Elodie here, like put together this little contraption of armor sets that are like extra outside of the one she put on, and lighting a fire underneath it, and she sets this up and then begins to move. She also does a really clever thing here of finding those I don't know if she uses the blue worms again or something else, but she goops herself up so to hide her scent because she knew from before that that's how she was being tracked. So again, an interesting choice, which kind of like, oh, okay, she's really putting this together now. So the fire goes off, it drops the armor, so the dragon thinks like, oh, she's returned, so it goes over there to where the noise is. And meanwhile, she's made her way, scooping around, gets to her younger sister. Uh, bu- 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 bu. So she gets the younger sister gets to hide while she is now the primary target as the dragon returns from said trap or rather distraction. Excuse me. So she is jabbed by this dragon, like in the armor, and she retorts by jabbing the dragon right back. Um, and is flinged into the water. It is a very brief moment, but we see it hurt, and then obviously the water would alleviate fire, obviously. The sister, who has been hiding, tosses her down the sword. The younger sister, that being, obviously. And once again, when she is jabbed, she retorts with a jab of her own on the dragon. So again, she's now retorting back against the dragon, whereas previously she's just been running and hiding. She gets this swift underneath jab on the dragon when her arm is grabbed. Um, and the dragon goes on about you should accept your fate. You should accept that you are going to you are still going to die here. But she has injured the dragon in such a way where the wing has been heavily injured. When she did jab, she jabbed one of its eyes. So the dragon is suffering. And she's once again taking advantage of this. She backs herself up against this wall, and it's a surface because we see her backing up towards it. And while the dragon was snarling, we see that the gust that we see, like she looks back at it, and we see that the gust sort of curves back to where it was received from. So that's where she's heading towards, because she knows now that that's the case. If she can get the dragon to breathe fire in that spot, that the fire would do the same exact thing. So she manages to lure the dragon to that spot. Then she does akin to like the predator thing, essentially, and she's like, come on, burn me, do it, coward. And well, in this instance it actually works, though. The dragon builds up, releases the fire, it curves back, and it hits the dragon. So the dragon has now burned itself, and that is the dragon is essentially on its last limbs here after that self-infliction wound. But she instead shows her cut hand, as I mentioned earlier, how they do that, and does the just talk method of this, and begins to explain that this dragon has been lied to, how they go about doing this. And the dragon has a last moment of just end me, because I realize that is my fate now that you've done all this. But she holds the sword aloft, she holds it up, she strikes it down, obviously missing, and then offers the dragon the blue bugs. She grabs a bunch of them, she places them on the dragon to heal the dragon instead. After her explanation about how the dragon has been tricked, and now the dragon fully understands what has been happening. But a new third wedding is being planned. Surprise, surprise. So, a new random female, who we don't even know the name of yet, by the way, is with Henry. They're already at the altar. We're about to rigmarole this trick again, and this time we're just praying it works. But surprise, surprise, what none of them came to expect is that Ellie makes her way out after tossing the coin over one of the things that she was offered, and begins to make her way towards the altar. And she goes to this new, potential person of being in this trap, and explains what this actually is and how she will be sacrifice number 3. And the queen is like constantly retorting her, being like, no, you're just a nobody, how, just because you escaped it's irrelevant. And she retorts back that she isn't the one who should be seen as a threat. And then shortly after the she gets the new potential princess to leave, the dragon, who is now recovered due to the blue goop beetle things, or slugs rather, hooks onto the castle, and everyone, or some of the people, freak out. Some of them are staying for because I don't know. And we see the dragon begin to burn down the castle. We've seen it burn down the queen herself, and she goes, no! And this is where, as I mentioned before, as as I cut her name in my notes, that's what I referred to her in my notes as. And she kind of calls her stepmom her mom at this point. And we cut to some time later. I'm not sure how much amount of time, but I guess some. Where they're traveling, and she, as she sort of briefly mentioned to Henry, how she wanted to see the world, so she's exploring, and we see them set sail. And alongside them, the dragon is just chilling and traveling with them. And that is where the movie Damsel wraps up. And yeah, I will say, despite this movie's terrible trailer, I do think that this movie is actually pretty decent, all things considered. Despite the amount of reveals they let slip through the trailer, I do still think that this movie is actually pretty decent. I do think that the journey in seeing her transform still is quite a interesting one. Again, exploring these ideas of what weddings used to be in this olden time is definitely an interesting concept, because they're obviously playing with that a lot here. And yeah, her sort of resourcefulness coming into play bit by bit as we progress through. I really do enjoy this movie. I think it is a swell movie that is definitely going to be ruined by its own trailer. Unfortunately, I do think that's going to be the case. So yeah, I think this movie is really surprisingly solid despite its trailer. I would still give it an 8 out of 10. I think this movie does a lot more than I was expecting of it from even what I was seeing from the trailer. Like I said, exploring these themes or through the story, exploring, the whole father aspect of it in his choice, and subsequently, again, right after that, her choice of self-preservation through the sacrifice of the horse. Again, I think that is very deliberate here. Um, and I think that is a very interesting thing to look into deeper outside of the very brief context that it is in. Um, so yeah, I think this movie is surprisingly really good. Again, I really wish that the trailers didn't portray that much, but it is what it is these days, unfortunately. So yeah, 8 out of 10. Would recommend giving it a watch even if you think you know everything. I would say the journey's still worth it. Um, and yeah, that's my review of it. So if you end up enjoying said review, then please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Also make sure to check out those links in the description. I want to head over to my petition to help out small YouTubers, second and third to my Patreon and PayPal. One can help support me, my channel directly, and fourth to my Discord server, where you join, collab, and chill, and do all that cool stuff. And until next time, everyone, bye-bye.